You can fire a man for being quiet, the billionaire CEO said with a calm smile, but sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding everything together. No one in the glass-walled conference room realized how painfully true those words would become before the sun went down. The Monday morning skyline shimmered above downtown Seattle as silver clouds drifted across the towers of Sterling Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing artificial intelligence companies in America. Inside the executive boardroom, polished walnut reflected the glow of floor-to-ceiling windows while the scent of fresh coffee lingered between expensive suits and polished confidence. Victoria Sterling stood at the head of the table with effortless authority. At 38, she had become one of the youngest billionaire CEOs in the country, celebrated by magazines for her sharp instincts and fearless decisions. Investors admired her. Employees respected her. Competitors feared her. She believed every decision had to be made without emotion, because feelings, in her experience, blurred judgment. Across the room stood Ethan Walker, holding a thin folder with both hands. His blue company badge still hung neatly from his shirt pocket. His sleeves were rolled once at the forearms, revealing hands marked by years of honest work rather than luxury. He looked neither nervous nor angry, just tired. Behind the glass wall outside the conference room, 11-year-old Noah Walker sat quietly in a chair beside reception, finishing homework while waiting for his father to finish what was supposed to be a routine meeting before they shared lunch together. He glanced up every few moments, smiling whenever he caught sight of his dad through the transparent wall. Ethan always smiled back. Victoria closed the personnel file with a soft click that echoed louder than anyone expected. "Effective immediately," she said evenly. "Your position has been eliminated." The room became perfectly still. Several department managers exchanged uneasy glances but remained silent. Ethan nodded once, almost as if he had expected the outcome long before walking inside. "I understand," he replied. His voice carried no bitterness, only quiet acceptance. Victoria studied him for a moment, surprised that he offered no argument. "You have nothing to say?" she asked. Ethan met her eyes with remarkable calm. "Only that I hope the company continues to succeed." A faint smirk appeared on one executive's face. Another quietly shook his head, assuming Ethan lacked ambition. Victoria slid an envelope across the table. "Human resources will assist you." Ethan accepted it with steady hands. "Thank you for the opportunity." He turned without another word. Outside the room, Noah immediately stood as his father approached. "Everything okay, Dad?" he asked softly. Ethan rested a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "We'll figure out," he said with a small smile that somehow felt stronger than despair. They walked together toward the elevator, their footsteps fading into the polished hallway, while no one noticed several monitors throughout the operations center suddenly flicker for less than a second. It was so brief that every engineer ignored it. By sunset, that single flicker would grow into the crisis that threatened to erase billions of dollars in value. And the only person who truly understood why was not the billionaire CEO who had just fired an employee. It was the quiet 11-year-old boy walking beside his father, carrying nothing more than a backpack, a math notebook, and a secret way of seeing problems that the smartest adults in the building had never learned to notice. The elevator doors closed with a quiet chime, separating Ethan and Noah from the company that had been part of their lives for nearly 6 years. Neither of them spoke during the ride down. Outside, a light drizzle softened the Seattle streets, turning the sidewalks into mirrors beneath the gray afternoon sky. Ethan unlocked his aging blue Ford Explorer, placing a cardboard box filled with family photographs, a coffee mug, and a worn notebook onto the back seat. Noah climbed in beside him, fastening his seat belt without being reminded. After several minutes of silence, he finally looked toward his father. "Are you worried?" he asked gently. Ethan started the engine before answering. "I would be lying if I said no." Noah nodded slowly. "Are we going to lose the house?" Ethan smiled, not because the question was easy, but because his son trusted him enough to ask it. "We still have time. We have savings. We have each other. Sometimes life changes before it gets better." Noah stared out the rain-speckled window as the city drifted past. You could have told her the truth. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Some truths are not meant to defend pride. Noah frowned. But she blamed you. Ethan's hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. People can only judge what they understand. It is not our job to force them to see. Meanwhile, 40 floors above them, the atmosphere inside Sterling Dynamics had begun to change. A soft alert appeared across several engineering monitors before disappearing almost instantly. One developer dismissed it as a temporary network delay. Another restarted a server without concern. 10 minutes later, another warning appeared, this time affecting the predictive analytics platform responsible for processing millions of customer requests every hour. Daniel Brooks, the company's chief technology officer, frowned as he watched graphs fluctuate in ways he had never seen before. Run diagnostics, he instructed calmly. Fingers raced across keyboards. Lines of code streamed across enormous displays covering the operations center walls. The low hum of computers blended with hurried conversations until the room sounded less like a technology company and more like an airport before storm. Victoria stepped inside, coffee still in hand. "What is happening?" she asked. Daniel forced a reassuring smile. "Probably a synchronization issue. We should have it isolated in a few minutes." She nodded once. "Our board presentation begins in 2 hours. Make sure everything is stable." He answered with confidence, but his eyes betrayed growing uncertainty. Back across town, Ethan and Noah stopped at a neighborhood diner where they always shared grilled cheese sandwiches after difficult days. The waitress greeted them by name, and Ethan thanked her with the same kindness he offered everyone. Noah pulled a small notebook from his backpack while they waited for lunch. Instead of drawing superheroes like most boys his age, he filled pages with numbers, diagrams, and tiny flowcharts that seemed to connect invisible patterns. Ethan noticed but said nothing. He had learned years ago that Noah often solved problems best when left alone with a pencil. Suddenly Noah paused. His eyes narrowed. He remembered the brief glimpse of a dashboard screen he had seen through the conference room glass while waiting for his father. It had displayed only a few lines before someone walked in front of it, but one detail refused to leave his mind. A timestamp, a sequence number, and a tiny warning icon that appeared exactly where it should not have been. Noah quietly turned the notebook sideways and began sketching boxes connected by arrows. Ethan looked over with curiosity. "Homework?" Noah hesitated before answering. "Not exactly." He erased one line and replaced it with another. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "That does not look like a software failure." Ethan studied his son's thoughtful expression, but chose not to interrupt. Outside the diner window, the rain continued to fall gently while miles away inside Sterling Dynamics. Every screen in the operations center suddenly flashed the same bright warning at exactly the same second, and the room that had been filled with confident voices fell into a silence no one had expected. Back at Sterling Dynamics, the atmosphere had transformed from disciplined confidence into controlled anxiety. The giant status wall that usually glowed with reassuring shades of green now flashed scattered amber warnings across multiple regions of the network. Engineers moved quickly between workstations, the clicking of keyboards growing louder with every passing minute. The familiar scent of fresh coffee had been replaced by the tension that always seemed to fill a room when brilliant people realized they no longer understood the problem in front of them. Daniel Brooks rubbed his forehead before speaking. "Run another integrity check." A senior engineer looked up from her monitor. "Already did. Everything says the infrastructure is healthy." Another voice interrupted. "Then why are customer requests timing out?" Nobody answered. Victoria Sterling stood behind the operations team with folded arms, watching millions of dollars disappear one delayed transaction at a time. Her expression remained composed, but inside she could feel something unfamiliar creeping closer. "Doubt. How long until the board meeting?" she asked quietly. 1 hour and 32 minutes, Daniel replied without looking away from the screens. "And our largest client? Their executives are already flying in." Victoria took a slow breath. "Then fix it before they arrive." Across town, Ethan and Noah finished lunch. As they walked toward the parking lot, Noah remained unusually quiet. He opened his notebook again while leaning against the hood of the old Ford Explorer. His pencil moved carefully, drawing boxes connected by arrows, then crossing them out before beginning again. Ethan watched without interrupting. He had seen that look before. It was the same expression Noah wore while solving puzzles that older students struggled to finish. Finally, Ethan smiled gently. "Something is bothering you." Noah nodded. The warning on that dashboard did not make sense. Ethan tilted his head. "You only saw it for a second. Sometimes 1 second is enough." Ethan waited. Noah pointed to his sketch. "Everyone thinks the computers are failing." "You do not." Noah slowly shook his head. "If the computers were failing, the alerts would spread randomly. But the numbers I saw were perfectly synchronized." Ethan looked down at the page, although the diagrams meant little to him. "So what does that mean?" Noah hesitated. "It looks more like everyone is waiting for permission from something that stopped answering." Ethan remained silent. Noah continued drawing another diagram. "Imagine your whole neighborhood waiting at one traffic light. The cars are fine. The roads are fine. The drivers are fine. The light just never changes." Ethan's eyes softened with quiet admiration. "You think they're fixing the wrong problem?" Noah nodded. "If they keep replacing working parts, they might make everything worse." Ethan smiled proudly but calmly. "You know, there is something more important than being right." Noah looked up. "What?" "Knowing when people are ready to hear you." Noah considered the answer while closing the notebook. At that exact moment, Victoria's phone vibrated. The caller identification displayed the name of the chairman of the board. She answered immediately. "Richard." His voice was unusually serious. "Victoria, I just received a message from our largest client. Their systems have stopped receiving live data from us. They want answers before they land." Victoria walked toward the conference room windows overlooking the rainy Seattle skyline. "Give me 30 minutes. Richard did not respond immediately. Then he spoke with measured concern. "Victoria, if this presentation fails today, the acquisition will not simply be delayed. It will disappear." The call ended. Victoria stared through the glass as gray clouds settled over the city. For the first time in years, she realized that every expert inside her building was searching for answers, yet no one seemed to be asking the right question. Miles away, Noah quietly slipped his notebook into his backpack, unaware that the simple sketch he had just completed described the invisible flaw that an entire floor of experienced engineers had failed to recognize. The afternoon rain continued to wash over Seattle as Ethan drove toward home, but Noah could not stop thinking about the diagrams filling his notebook. He replayed every image he had glimpsed through the conference room glass, every flashing icon, every sequence number, every tiny detail that most people would have ignored. Finally, he spoke. "Dad, would it be strange if we went back?" Ethan glanced at him with quiet curiosity. "Back where?" "To your office." Ethan smiled gently. "It is not my office anymore." Noah looked down for a moment before answering. "I know, but if I am right, they're going to make everything worse." Ethan remained silent for several seconds. The windshield wipers swept steadily across the glass, filling the truck with a calm rhythm. "You believe someone should hear you?" Noah nodded. "Not because I want to be right, because I think they need help." Ethan slowly turned the steering wheel toward downtown. "Then we will try. Whether they listen is up to them." 30 minutes later, the familiar glass tower of Sterling Dynamics rose once again before them. The lobby buzzed with unusual urgency. Employees hurried through security carrying laptops, phones, and stacks of printed reports. The atmosphere no longer felt polished. It felt strained. Ethan approached the reception desk with the same quiet dignity he had shown when leaving earlier that day. "Good afternoon, Melissa." The receptionist looked up, surprised but relieved to see him. "Ethan, I have never seen this place like this." Noah stepped forward politely. "Excuse me, could someone tell Mr. Daniel Brooks that I think I know what is causing the problem?" Melissa blinked, uncertain whether she had heard correctly. "Sweetheart, the engineering department has more than 200 people working on that." Noah smiled respectfully. "I know." Before she could answer, a security supervisor approached. "Sir, your employee access has been deactivated." Ethan nodded without complaint. "I understand." My son only wanted to pass along an observation. The supervisor offered an apologetic smile. I'm sorry. No visitors are allowed upstairs right now. Noah looked toward the elevators where worried engineers continued rushing in and out. Could you at least give this notebook to Mr. Brooks? The supervisor hesitated before shaking his head. I cannot interrupt the executive response team over a child's drawing. Noah lowered the notebook without saying another word. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. It is all right. Just then, one of the software engineers hurried through the lobby, carrying 3 laptops. Ethan recognized her immediately. Emily Foster had worked beside him for nearly 4 years. Emily, Ethan called gently. She stopped and smiled with obvious relief. Ethan, you picked the right day to leave. Everything is falling apart. Noah stepped forward. Miss Foster, could you please show this to Mr. Brooks? Emily glanced at the notebook before offering an exhausted smile. That is very thoughtful, but we have senior architects, consultants, and outside specialists working on this. They have been solving problems like these for decades. Noah answered softly. Maybe they are looking in the wrong place. Emily's expression remained kind, but she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and shook her head. I wish it were that simple. She hurried toward the elevators before either of them could say another word. Noah watched the doors close. He did not look disappointed, only thoughtful. Ethan noticed. Does it bother you? Noah shrugged lightly. Not really. Why not? The boy looked through the towering glass windows toward the darkening sky. People trust experience before they trust curiosity. Ethan smiled proudly. That is true. Noah tightened his grip on the notebook. But the problem does not care how old someone is. At that exact moment, every light inside the lobby flickered once before emergency backup systems quietly activated. Several employees froze where they stood. A wave of anxious whispers spread through the building. Somewhere far above them, another critical alarm echoed across the operations center. And for the first time that day, even Victoria Sterling realized they were no longer racing to protect a business. They were racing against time itself. The warning alarms continued echoing through Sterling Dynamics as more screens shifted from amber to flashing red. Engineers spoke over one another, comparing logs that refused to make sense. Every solution created another problem somewhere else. Daniel Brooks stood in the center of the operations floor, staring at a wall of live data that had suddenly become impossible to predict. Stop restarting the clusters, he called out. We are changing too many variables. A senior architect turned toward him with visible frustration. If we do nothing, response times will keep climbing. Another engineer interrupted. The East Coast servers are beginning to queue requests. Daniel closed his eyes for one brief second before making another decision. Freeze every non-essential deployment. Nobody touches production without my approval. Across the room, Victoria watched the digital clock above the conference entrance. Less than 45 minutes remained before the board presentation. Every passing second felt heavier than the last. Down in the lobby, Ethan noticed employees rushing past with anxious expressions. He quietly reached for the notebook in Noah's hands. If nobody listens, we should go home. Noah looked toward the elevators before answering. Can we wait 5 more minutes? Ethan studied his son's face. There was no stubbornness in his eyes, only quiet conviction. All right, he replied softly. 5 minutes. Almost as if the building itself had heard those words. One elevator opened unexpectedly. Daniel Brooks stepped out, speaking rapidly into his phone. No, do not bring in another consulting team. They will need hours just to understand the architecture. He ended the call with a tired sigh. Before he could continue walking, Noah stepped forward politely. Mr. Brooks? Daniel turned, recognizing Ethan immediately. Ethan, for the first time that afternoon, genuine surprise crossed his face. What are you doing here? Ethan answered calmly. We were on our way home. Noah believes he noticed something that might help. Daniel looked down at the notebook in the boy's hands. Behind him, another emergency notification vibrated across his phone. He forced a patient smile. That is kind of you, son, but we are dealing with an extremely complicated systems failure. Noah nodded respectfully. I know. Daniel started to leave, but Noah quietly added, May I ask one question? Daniel hesitated. Go ahead. Noah opened his notebook to a page filled with neatly drawn boxes connected by arrows. Did every alert begin at exactly the same time? Daniel frowned. Yes. And every server still reports healthy hardware? Daniel's expression changed slightly. Yes. Noah pointed to the sketch. Then maybe the computers are not waiting for instructions. Maybe the instructions are waiting for permission. Daniel remained completely still. Noah continued, speaking carefully. If one service stopped answering in the middle, every healthy system would keep waiting forever. They would all look broken, even though they are only waiting. Daniel's eyes moved back to the notebook. The simple drawing resembled a city of intersections controlled by one silent traffic light. There was nothing complicated about it. That was exactly what unsettled him. He whispered, almost to himself, the authorization broker. Noah nodded. That is what I thought when I saw the warning icon. Daniel stared at the page for another long moment before reaching for his phone. Pull the authentication dependency map, he ordered as soon as an engineer answered. Now! His voice carried a new urgency. Seconds later, another call came through. Daniel, an engineer said breathlessly, we just discovered every failed request is waiting on the same internal authorization process. Daniel slowly lowered the phone, looking first at Noah, then at Ethan. The noise of the busy lobby seemed to disappear around them. For several silent seconds, nobody spoke. Then Daniel asked the question that changed everything. Noah, would you be willing to come upstairs with me? Daniel Brooks held the notebook carefully as though it contained something far more valuable than a few pages of pencil sketches. The elevator climbed toward the executive floor in complete silence. Ethan stood beside his son with quiet composure, while Noah watched the floor numbers rise one by one without the slightest trace of excitement. When the doors opened, the operations center looked nothing like the confident workplace they had left only hours earlier. Conversations overlapped across the room. Digital dashboards flashed warning after warning. Coffee cups sat untouched beside keyboards as engineers searched desperately for answers that seemed to move farther away with every passing minute. Heads turned the moment Ethan entered. Some employees looked surprised. Others looked embarrassed. Victoria Sterling stepped away from the main display the instant she saw him. Her expression hardened. Why is he here? She asked. Daniel answered before anyone else could speak. Because I believe we have been looking in the wrong direction. Victoria Froneth. From a former employee? Daniel slowly held up Noah's notebook. From his son. A few engineers exchanged skeptical smiles. One quietly whispered, we are trusting a middle school student now. Noah heard the comment, but showed no reaction. Ethan gently rested a hand on his shoulder, silently reminding him that dignity never needed to defend itself. Daniel walked to the center display and connected his tablet. Noah's simple diagram appeared across the giant screen, looking almost childish beside thousands of lines of technical information. Victoria folded her arms. Explain. Daniel took a slow breath. We assumed the infrastructure was failing because every service stopped responding at the same time. But if every healthy service is waiting on a single authorization broker that stopped issuing approvals, then replacing servers would never solve the real problem. An engineer interrupted. We already checked the authentication service. Noah spoke quietly for the first time since entering the room. Did you check whether it failed? Everyone looked toward him. He continued with calm confidence. Or did you check whether something prevented it from answering even though it was still running? The room became noticeably quieter. Daniel immediately pointed toward another engineer. Trace every dependency connected to the authorization broker. Ignore the hardware. Follow the permissions. Fingers flew across keyboards. New windows opened across the displays. Seconds passed like minutes. Finally, one analyst leaned forward in disbelief. I found it. Nobody breathed. An automated security update created a circular approval request. Every authentication call has been waiting on another authentication call that can never finish. Another engineer quickly verified the discovery. That is why every server looked healthy. Nothing actually crashed. Daniel turned toward Victoria. He was right. Victoria stared silently at the screen as years of executive confidence collided with one impossible reality. The crisis threatening billions of dollars had not been solved by another expensive consultant or another emergency meeting. It had been uncovered by an 11-year-old boy carrying a spiral notebook. Daniel looked at Noah with genuine respect. "Can you show us how you recognized it so quickly?" Noah smiled shyly. "My dad taught me that when every answer looks wrong, sometimes the question is wrong." Every eye slowly shifted toward Ethan. He looked almost uncomfortable receiving attention. Victoria studied him differently now. The quiet maintenance employee she had dismissed only hours earlier suddenly seemed like someone she had never truly known. One senior engineer broke the silence. "Ethan, did you teach him systems architecture?" Ethan smiled gently. "I taught him to look for patterns before conclusions." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That might be the most valuable lesson anyone in this room has forgotten." Within minutes, the engineering team isolated the circular authorization loop and prepared a control correction. One by one, the warning lights across the operations center faded from red to amber, then from amber to green. Across the massive display wall, customer requests began flowing normally again. Conversation stopped. Keyboards became still. For several unforgettable seconds, the entire operations center stood in complete silence. Not because the crisis remained, but because every person in the room had just witnessed humility accomplish what pride could not. The final confirmation appeared on the operations wall as the last stream of delayed customer requests cleared from the system. Green indicators slowly replaced every warning until the enormous display looked exactly as it had that morning, except the room watching it had changed forever. One engineer quietly began a clap, then another. Within seconds, the entire operations center filled with respectful applause, not for a software update, but for the quiet wisdom that had arrived carrying a backpack instead of an executive title. Noah looked up at his father with an uncertain smile, almost embarrassed by the attention. Ethan simply nodded once, silently reminding him to receive kindness with humility. Daniel Brooks stepped toward the center of the room and addressed the exhausted team. "Everyone, remember this moment. We spent hours trying to prove our assumptions instead of questioning them. Today, a young man reminded us that clear thinking always beats loud confidence." Several engineers lowered their eyes, recognizing themselves in those words. Victoria Sterling remained completely still. She watched Ethan standing beside Noah with the same calm expression he had carried when she dismissed him only a few hours earlier. There was no satisfaction in his face, no quiet revenge, no desire to make anyone feel small. Somehow that unsettled her more than anger ever could. She slowly walked toward him. The room instinctively became silent again. "Mr. Walker," she began, choosing her words more carefully than ever before, "I owe you an apology." Ethan looked at her with gentle respect. "There is no need." Victoria shook her head. "There is every need." She paused, taking a slow breath before continuing. "This morning I believed I was making a smart business decision. I looked at job titles, reports, and numbers. I never stopped to understand the people behind them." Ethan answered quietly. "Leadership is difficult. Everyone makes decisions with incomplete information." Victoria looked down for a brief moment before meeting his eyes again. "That does not excuse my decision." The sincerity in her voice surprised everyone listening. Daniel watched silently while several board members who had arrived early for the presentation exchanged thoughtful glances from the back of the room. One of them, Chairman Richard Hayes, stepped forward. "Ethan," he said warmly, "there is something I need to ask." Ethan nodded politely. Richard smiled toward Noah before speaking again. "How does an 11-year-old learn to think like this?" Ethan glanced at his son with unmistakable pride. "By asking questions together every evening." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You study computer science with him?" Ethan smiled. "Sometimes. Most nights we simply solved puzzles, fixed old electronics, played chess, and talked about why problems happen instead of who caused them." Noah quietly added, "Dad always says that understanding is more valuable than being the first person to speak." A gentle silence settled across the room. Victoria looked toward Daniel. Human Resources told me Ethan was only responsible for maintenance coordination during the past several years. Daniel nodded slowly. That is what he accepted after his wife passed away. He turned down multiple promotions because he wanted a schedule that allowed him to pick Noah up from school every afternoon. Victoria stared at Ethan in disbelief. You never told anyone? Ethan answered with the same quiet grace that had defined every conversation that day. My family was never a sacrifice. It was simply my priority. Richard folded his arms thoughtfully. There is something else in his personnel file. Victoria looked at him. What do you mean? Richard opened the digital record on his tablet, his expression changing with every line he read. After several long seconds, he looked directly at Victoria and spoke in a calm voice that carried through the silent room. Before joining this company, Ethan Walker was the senior systems architect who designed the original authorization framework that every version of this platform has been built upon. No one said a word. The room that had celebrated a remarkable child only moments earlier now realized they had overlooked an extraordinary father all along. For several long seconds, the room remained perfectly still. The revelation settled over every executive and engineer like the quiet rain falling outside the glass walls of Sterling Dynamics. Victoria looked at Ethan as though she were seeing him for the very first time. The man she had dismissed as an ordinary employee had never tried to impress anyone with his past. He had simply continued doing honest work while raising his son with patience and grace. Richard Hayes slowly lowered the tablet. Your previous company described your original architecture as one of the most reliable authorization frameworks in the industry, he said. Several firms attempted to recruit you after you left. Ethan smiled politely. I was grateful for every opportunity. Richard looked genuinely puzzled. Then why accept a position far below your experience? Ethan glanced toward Noah before answering. Because success has different meanings at different seasons of life. After my wife passed away, my son needed a father who could be home for dinner more than he needed a father with a larger office. The words settled into the room with unexpected weight. No presentation slide could have carried more meaning. Daniel quietly folded his arms. You built the foundation of the very system we almost lost today. Ethan nodded once. Years ago, yes. Hundreds of talented people improved it after I left. Victoria shook her head gently. But you never corrected anyone when they underestimated you. Ethan answered with the same calm voice that had guided Noah throughout the day. Respect that has to be demanded rarely lasts. Respect that is earned stays much longer. Victoria lowered her eyes. She realized that while she had spent years building a reputation through achievements, the man standing in front of her had built something far greater through character. Richard broke the silence with a thoughtful smile. I think our board meeting should begin with honesty instead of numbers. Victoria looked at him. What do you mean? I mean our investors deserve to know who truly protected this company today. Before she could respond, one of the administrative assistants entered the operations center. The clients and board members are assembled in the conference hall. Victoria nodded slowly. Please ask them for 5 more minutes. The assistant hesitated. They have been waiting. Victoria smiled for the first time that afternoon, though it carried none of her usual confidence. Only humility. Then they can wait 5 minutes more. She turned back toward Ethan and Noah. Would the two of you walk into that room with me? Ethan looked surprised. This is your meeting. Victoria answered quietly. No. Today it belongs to the people who reminded us what leadership actually looks like. Noah looked at his father without speaking. Ethan gave a small nod, and together they followed Victoria down the long hallway lined with framed awards and magazine covers celebrating years of corporate success. As they walked, Noah noticed something that made him smile. Every employee they passed stopped whatever they were doing. No one whispered anymore. No one looked past Ethan as if he were invisible. They simply stood aside with sincere respect. One engineer placed a hand over his heart and softly said, "Thank you." Another quietly apologized for dismissing the notebook in the lobby. Ethan accepted every word with the same gentle grace, never making anyone feel smaller for admitting they had been wrong. When the conference room doors finally opened, dozens of executives, investors, and clients looked toward the entrance, expecting another technical update. Instead, they saw a billionaire chief executive officer walking beside a quiet single father and his 11-year-old son. Confusion filled the room for only a brief moment before Victoria stopped at the head of the table, took a slow breath, and looked directly at every person waiting for her. Then she spoke the first words of the presentation, and they were not about profits, forecasts, or technology. "Before we discuss our business," she said, "there is someone you all deserve to meet, because today this company was saved by humility before it was saved by innovation." The conference room remained silent long after Victoria finished speaking. Investors who had arrived expecting quarterly forecasts now found themselves listening to a story that no spreadsheet could ever explain. Sunlight finally broke through the Seattle clouds, casting warm reflections across the glass walls, as if the city itself had decided the storm had lasted long enough. Victoria stepped away from the head of the table and stood beside Ethan instead of in front of him. "This morning," she said honestly, "I judged a man by his position instead of his character. That mistake nearly cost us far more than a business opportunity. Today I learned that wisdom does not always sit in the largest office, and leadership is not measured by who speaks the loudest." The room remained completely still. Richard Hayes slowly stood from his chair. Then every member of the board followed. One by one, the investors rose to their feet, not because anyone asked them to, but because respect had quietly become the only appropriate response. Ethan looked almost uncomfortable with the attention. He glanced at Noah, who smiled proudly but remained just as humble as his father. Richard walked across the room carrying a small folder. "Ethan," he said warmly, "the board would like to offer you the position of Chief Systems Architect, along with full authority to rebuild the engineering mentorship program." Ethan accepted the folder without opening it. "Thank you. I am honored by your confidence." Victoria smiled hopefully. "Will you come back?" Ethan looked around the room before answering. "Only under one condition." Several executives exchanged curious glances. Victoria nodded. "Name it." Ethan's voice remained gentle. "No one in this company should ever be overlooked because of a job title, an age, or a quiet personality. The best ideas often come from the people who are still waiting to be heard." Daniel Brooks smiled immediately. "Agreed." Richard nodded. "So who does the board?" Victoria extended her hand. "Then we will build that culture together." Ethan shook her hand with calm confidence, not because he had won, but because forgiveness always builds more than resentment ever can. Weeks later, Sterling Dynamics felt like a different place. Conference rooms became places where interns were encouraged to ask questions before executives offered conclusions. Managers listened more carefully. Engineers challenged assumptions without fear of embarrassment. A new mentorship program paired experienced professionals with young students from local schools, and the first invitation was sent to Noah, who visited the office once each month after classes simply to solve puzzles with the engineering teams. He never acted like a hero. He remained an 11-year-old boy who loved mathematics, chess, and spending evenings at home with his father. Ethan returned to work with a flexible schedule that allowed him to keep every promise he had made to his son. Every afternoon, just before 5 o'clock, he still left the office on time, because no promotion was more important than being present at the dinner table. One evening, as father and son watched the sunset from the front porch of their modest home, Noah looked toward Ethan and quietly asked, "Dad, were you sad when she fired you?" Ethan smiled gently before answering. "For a little while." Noah thought about that. "Then why did you help them?" Ethan looked across the peaceful neighborhood as a cool breeze moved through the trees. "Because another person's mistake should never decide the kind of person we become." Noah nodded slowly, understanding a little more than he had the day before. Ethan rested a hand on his shoulder and added one final thought. "Remember this for the rest of your life. Knowledge may open doors. Talent may solve problems. Success may earn applause. But quiet dignity, kindness, and the courage to do what is right, even after being treated unfairly, will always leave the deepest legacy." Noah smiled, and neither of them said another word. Sometimes the strongest ending is not a celebration. Sometimes it is the peaceful silence that follows when every heart in the room finally understands what true greatness has looked like all along.